Isadora, this is the estate meeting.
Yes, I know.
It covers the accounts, financial matters, the tenancy reviews.
I don't mind. I will stay.
The estate meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, which was the third Tuesday of every month, and which was, therefore, the meeting that Barnaby Sinclair, 5th Duke of Ashmore, had been attending since his father died, and which he attended with the reliable competence of a man who understood that the estate required his presence at these meetings without particularly requiring his attention. Isadora had been told about the meeting on the Monday. Not invited, told. The distinction was one she had been noting since her arrival at Ashmore Hall 3 weeks ago, which was when she had understood that the difference between being the Duke's wife and being included in the Duke's life was a gap that was going to require active management. She was 20 years old, and she had been managing gaps actively since she was 12, which was when her father had first sat her down with the Cavendish banking concern's quarterly reports and had said, "These are the numbers that tell the story of what is happening in the world, and I want you to be able to read that story." She had learned to read it. The estate meeting took place in the Ashmore Hall study, which was a large room with dark oak panelling and 3 windows facing the north garden, and a mahogany table long enough for 8 people. When Isadora came in at 5 minutes to 10, there were already 5 people at the table. Barnaby at the head, Fitch, the estate solicitor, who was 57 and had the professional composure of a man who had managed this family's affairs for 20 years. Aldred, the estate steward, who was 61 and who looked at Isadora with the cautious assessment of someone who was not sure what to make of a duchess who arrived at estate meetings. And 2 men she did not yet know by name, who were sitting on Barnaby's left with the papers of people who had been expected. She sat in the chair to Barnaby's right. Fitch looked at Barnaby. Barnaby looked at Isadora. He had the expression he sometimes had when encountering her in rooms where he had not expected to encounter her, not unkind, simply the expression of a man whose categories had not accommodated something and who was arranging his categories around the new fact. "Isadora," he said, "this is the estate meeting." "Yes," she said, "I know." "It covers the accounts," he said. "Financial matters, the tenancy reviews. It can be dry." "I don't mind dry," she said. He looked at Fitch. Fitch returned the look with the professional neutrality of a solicitor who is managing multiple things simultaneously and who has decided that the management of this specific thing is above his pay grade. "The figures can be quite complex," Barnaby said, which was the managed version of what he wanted to say. "You might find it more comfortable to—" "I'll stay," she said. There was a brief pause. Then Barnaby said, "Of course. Fitch, shall we begin?" Before we continue, subscribe now and tell me in the comments. Isadora was told about the meeting on Monday. She showed up. Barnaby suggested she might find the figures complex. She said she'd stay. What do you think she knew about those figures, and what do you think was about to happen? The 2 men on Barnaby's left were introduced at the meeting's opening. The first was Mr. Hargreaves, who was the representative of the Alderton banking house, which held the largest portion of the Ashmore estate's outstanding debt. He was 43 and wore the specific expression of a man whose job it was to attend these meetings and confirm that the numbers were what they were supposed to be, and who was accustomed to the estate's principal being somewhat vague about what the numbers were. The second was Mr. Webb, who was from the Meridian investment concern, which held a secondary position in the estate's debt structure and which had been, according to her father, increasingly concerned about its exposure. She knew both institutions. She knew more about both institutions than Barnaby knew, which was the situation she had been in since 3 days before the wedding, when her father had sat across from her in his London office and had said, "I want to tell you what the Ashmore estate's finances actually look like." Her father was Charles Cavendish, who had built the Cavendish banking concern from a regional operation into the most significant private banking concern in the north of England over 40 years of work that he described as organised patience. He was 63, and he had the quality of a man who had spent 40 years watching money move through the English economy, and who understood from that watching that the difference between a financial position that was recoverable and one that was not was always, eventually, a matter of who read the numbers accurately and who did not. He had spent 3 days telling Isadora what he knew. What he knew was comprehensive. The Ashmore estate's primary debt was held by the Alderton banking house, specifically a mortgage instrument on the estate's primary income properties that had been negotiated in the 3rd year of the previous Duke's tenure, and which had been refinanced twice since, each refinancing adding to the principal rather than reducing it. The secondary debt was held by the Meridian investment concern, a series of shorter-term instruments taken out over the past 4 years to address cash flow gaps that the primary income had not been generating. A third instrument, smaller but structurally significant, was held by a private lender named Thomas Voss, who operated through a company called Northern Capital Partners, and who had the specific quality of private lenders who held debt on estates. Patience until the patience ran out, and then rapidly, everything at once. The fourth was more recent, a 6-month instrument with a firm called Caledonian Agricultural Finance, taken out in the autumn and due for renewal in February. Her father had given her the names, the current balances, the terms, and his assessment of the risk profile of each. She had filed all of it. She had also, quietly, without mentioning it to Barnaby, reviewed the estate accounts that Mrs. Aldred, the housekeeper, had shown her in the 2nd week, when Isadora had asked to see the household accounts, and Mrs. Aldred had produced them with the careful, assessing look of a woman who had been in this house for 20 years, and who was deciding what to make of the new Duchess. The household accounts were in reasonable order. The estate accounts, which were separate, and which she had asked Aldred, the steward, for at the end of the 2nd week, with the same direct, matter-of-fact courtesy she used for all requests, we were in the condition that estate accounts were in when they had been managed by someone who understood what the numbers were, but not necessarily what they meant. She had understood what they meant. She had spent the 3rd week thinking about what she was going to do with the understanding. The meeting began with the tenancy review, which was Aldred's domain, and which he covered with the practiced competence of a man who had been doing this for 20 years. 3 tenancies renewed at existing rates. 1 tenancy on the north boundary under renegotiation, the Henderson family, who had been on the land for 3 generations, and who were requesting a reduction in light of the season's disappointing yields. Barnaby said he would need to consider the Henderson situation. Isadora said, without intending to say anything, that the Henderson yield data from the past 3 seasons suggested the issue was drainage rather than weather, and that the County Board's agricultural survey from the previous year had flagged the north boundary's water table as a management priority. Barnaby looked at her. Aldred looked at her. "The County Board survey," Barnaby said. "It was in the estate files," she said. "The folder labelled Agricultural County Assessments. It arrived in October. I found it last week." Aldred cleared his throat. "Her Grace is correct about the survey," he said, with the specific, careful tone of a man who was confirming something he had intended to present at a subsequent meeting. "The drainage assessment. We'll address the Henderson situation after the financial review," Barnaby said. He looked at Isadora. Then he looked at Fitch. "The accounts." Before we continue, subscribe now and tell me in the comments, Isadora had found the County Board survey in the estate files and knew about the Henderson drainage issue before the meeting started. Barnaby moved on. "What do you think happened when the financial review began?" Fitch opened his folder. He had the organised, professional manner of a man presenting material he had prepared, and which he expected to present without significant interruption. He covered the estate's income first, the agricultural tenancies, the timber income from the North Woodland, the small amount from the estate's secondary properties. The income was what it was, sufficient to service the debt at current rates, provided nothing changed. Fitch then moved to the debt. He described it in the general terms he used at these meetings, which were terms designed to be informative without being alarming, the language of a solicitor who understood that the family he represented needed to understand enough to act without being frightened into acting incorrectly. He named the Alderton banking house first. "The primary instrument," Isadora said when Fitch had finished his description. "The current balance on the Alderton position is that the restated figure from the November refinancing or the original principal." Fitch stopped. He looked at her. The expression on his face was the expression of a man who has been presenting information to people in this family for 20 years and who has never been asked this question. "The restated figure," he said, "from November." "Which brings the principal to approximately 43,000, she said, "at the current rate with the quarterly payment structure." Fitch looked at his papers. He looked at her. "That is correct," he said, with the specific care of a solicitor who is confirming a number that he had not stated and which the person across from him should not have known. Hargreaves, at Barnaby's left, had gone very still. Barnaby was looking at Isadora with an expression she had not seen on him before. "The Meridian position," she continued. "The secondary instruments, there are 3 of them, the most recent taken out in August. The August instrument has a 6-month term, which makes it due in February. The renewal rate that Meridian has indicated." She paused. "I should ask whether Meridian has communicated their renewal position, or whether that is still under discussion." Webb, the Meridian representative, said carefully, "We have communicated a preliminary renewal rate, yes." "Is the preliminary rate the one Fitch has in his folder," she said, "or the revised figure that was communicated last week?" Webb looked at Fitch. Fitch looked at his folder. There was a silence that had a different quality from the silences that preceded it. "The revised figure," Fitch said, "was communicated to me on Friday." "If the revised rate applies to the February renewal," Isadora said, "the quarterly payment structure changes. The February payment increases by approximately 12% over the current figure. At the current income levels, that creates a shortfall." "A shortfall," Barnaby said, "of approximately £800 per quarter," she said, "if the income figures Fitch has presented are accurate and the Meridian renewal proceeds at the revised rate." The room was quiet. Fitch was looking at his papers, then he was looking at Isadora, then he was looking at his papers again with the specific quality of a man confirming something he had been hoping would require a longer meeting to arrive at. "Her Grace's arithmetic," Fitch said carefully, "is correct." Barnaby said, "The figures were going to be complex." Isadora looked at him. "They are complex," she said. "The complexity is why they require attention." He looked at her for a long moment with the expression that was becoming familiar, the expression of a man who had expected to encounter one thing and had encountered another. And he said, "How do you know about the Meridian revised rate?" "My father told me," she said. "Your father?" "Charles Cavendish," she said. "Before the wedding. He reviewed the estate's debt position because he was concerned about the marriage's financial context, and he thought I should understand it." Barnaby looked at Hargreaves. Hargreaves was looking at the table. Barnaby looked at Webb. Webb was looking at his hands. "Your father," Barnaby said, "reviewed my estate's debt position." "He reviews the debt positions of any estate into which a Cavendish family member is marrying," she said. "He has done this for 30 years. It is how he protects his family's interests." Barnaby was quiet. "He shared his review with you," he said. "He shared everything with me," she said. "He has been doing so since I was 12. I am his primary business heir in the sense that he has no sons, and he believes that knowledge belongs to whoever is willing to acquire it." She waited for this to settle. She had known this conversation would come. She had been thinking about how to have it since the 2nd week of the marriage, when she had understood from the quality of the estate's financial management what the marriage's financial context actually required. She had decided, in the 3rd week, that she was not going to manage Barnaby's discomfort with her competence. She was going to address the competence's relevance to the situation and allow him to manage his own discomfort in his own time. Before we continue, subscribe now and tell me in the comments. Isadora named the creditors, the balances, and the revised rate in the first estate meeting of her marriage. She did it quietly, without performance. What do you think Barnaby was feeling, and what do you think the 2 men from the banking houses were thinking? What Hargreaves was thinking was that he was going to need to revise his approach to the Ashmore account. He had been managing the Ashmore account, the Alderton banking house's primary instrument with the Sinclair estate, for 6 years, and in those 6 years he had developed a working understanding of the account's principle that he now understood required significant revision. The working understanding had been, the Duke of Ashmore was a man of generally good faith who managed his estate's financial position with the competence of someone who had inherited a complicated situation and was maintaining it at approximately the level at which he had received it. He was not financially sophisticated, which was not unusual for men of his background and title. He trusted Fitch. He attended the monthly meetings with the regular presence of a man who understood that attending was required, and with the limited engagement of a man who did not fully understand what he was attending. The new Duchess of Ashmore was apparently a different kind of problem entirely. She knew the November restatement figure. She knew the 3 Meridian instruments by number and term. She knew about the revised rate that Webb had communicated to Fitch last Friday, which meant she knew about a communication that had occurred 4 days after the wedding and which she should have had no access to. Unless Charles Cavendish had sources within the Meridian concern's communications that Hargreaves had not been aware of, which was a possibility that Hargreaves filed under the category of things that required careful thought before the next communication with the Alderton banking house's senior management. Webb was thinking something similar, and was also thinking about the February renewal and whether the revised rate was, in the current context, the optimal position. Fitch was thinking about 20 years of estate meetings and the specific quality of the adjustment that was happening in his understanding of who attended these meetings and what they understood. Barnaby was thinking about his father-in-law. "Your father," he said, "Charles Cavendish, he runs the Cavendish banking concern." "He built it," she said. "He's been running it for 40 years. "I know who he is," Barnaby said, with the dignity of a man who does know who his father-in-law is, and who is managing the realization that knowing who someone is and knowing what that person has communicated to his daughter are different things. "I did not know he had reviewed the estate." "He told you before the marriage," she said. "He told you that he considered the estate's financial position a relevant factor in his assessment of the match. You told him you appreciated his diligence." "I thought he was being conventional," Barnaby said. "He was being thorough," she said. There was another silence. Fitch cleared his throat. "Shall we continue with the meeting?" "Yes," Isadora said. "The third position, Northern Capital Partners, through Thomas Voss, the current balance and the term." Fitch looked at his papers. He found the entry. 12,400, he said. "Short term, renewable quarterly." "The renewal is also in February," she said, "the same quarter as the Meridian instrument." Fitch confirmed this. 2 renewals in February, she said, producing a combined new payment obligation that exceeds the estate's quarterly income by approximately, she calculated, £1,900. 1,900, Barnaby said. "If both instruments renew at the current indicated rates," she said, "if either or both renew at a higher rate, the shortfall increases." Barnaby looked at the table. He looked at Hargreaves, who was looking at his papers. He looked at Webb, who was also looking at his papers. He looked at Fitch, who had the expression of a man who had been managing this situation at the level of competent presentation for 20 years, and who was now in a meeting where the presentation had been superseded by something more thorough. "Why?" Barnaby said. "Has this not been presented this way before?" Fitch was quiet for a moment. "The individual instruments have been reviewed at each meeting," he said. "The combined February position had not been presented as a combined position," Barnaby said. "No," Fitch said. Barnaby looked at Isadora. "You've been here 3 weeks," he said. "Yes," she said. "You've identified a combined February shortfall of £1,900 in 3 weeks." "The information was in the files," she said. "The estate files and what my father told me. The combination was not difficult to produce once you had both pieces." He was quiet. She waited. She had learned from her father that the most important part of a meeting was not the presentation of the information, but the space you gave the other person to process it. Her father called it the courtesy of the pause. She gave Barnaby the courtesy of the pause. He used it. "What do you think we should do?" he said. Not as a social courtesy, as a genuine question. The question of a man who has understood that the person across from him knows something he needs to know, and who is asking in the register of actual wanting to know. She thought about how to answer this. She had, in fact, thought about this for the entire third week of the marriage. She had thought about the February instruments and the combined position, and what the options were, and which of those options was the most effective, and what it would require to implement any of them. 3 things, she said, in order of priority. She held up one finger. The first is the Meridian renewal. The revised rate Webb communicated on Friday is not the optimal rate for Meridian either. The current instrument is performing, and a renewal at a higher rate increases the risk of default, which is not in Meridian's interest. The revised rate was an opening position. There is room to negotiate. She held up a second finger. The second is the Henderson tenancy. The north boundary drainage issue is solvable. My father's concern has funded drainage improvement projects on 3 estates in the past decade. The County Board's survey provides the technical basis. If the Henderson tenancy is restructured to include a maintenance contribution toward the drainage work, the yield improvement over 3 years would cover the cost, and the tenancy income would stabilize. She held up a third finger. The third is Northern Capital Partners, Thomas Voss. The 12,000 instrument is the most structurally fragile. Voss is a private lender whose exposure to this estate represents approximately 30% of his total loan book. He has a liquidity interest in maintaining the instrument rather than calling it, but if the February position becomes distressed, his incentive structure changes. The correct move is to approach Voss before February with a restructuring proposal that extends the term in exchange for a modest rate reduction. He benefits from the extension. The estate benefits from the reduced quarterly obligation. The room was quiet. It was the quiet of 5 people who have just heard a 20-year-old woman describe in 3 numbered points a more coherent plan for managing the Ashmore estate's February debt obligations than the estate's solicitor of 20 years had produced. Hargreaves was the first to speak. "The Meridian revised rate," he said directly to Isadora. "Your father's view on the negotiating room. He believes there is a 15 to 20% reduction available from the preliminary figure," she said, "based on the current instrument's performance and Meridian's own portfolio composition." Webb looked up from his papers. He said, with the careful tone of a man who is confirming something, "The portfolio composition. The Meridian concern has 17 estate instruments currently active," she said. "The Ashmore instrument is the 5th largest. The 3 instruments below it are all in sectors that have underperformed in the past 2 years. The Ashmore instrument's payment history is good. Meridian's incentive to maintain a performing instrument at the current rate is stronger than the preliminary revised rate suggests." Webb looked at Fitch. Fitch looked at his papers. Webb said, "I would need to consult with our principals on the renewal terms." "Of course," Isadora said. "That seems appropriate." She said it with the warmth of a woman who was not being sarcastic and who was genuinely agreeable about the consultation process, which was a quality her father had always called the distinction between winning an argument and producing a useful outcome. Before we continue, subscribe now and tell me in the comments. Isadora had named all 4 creditors in order at the start of the meeting. By the end of the first hour, she had also produced a 3-point plan for the February position. Hargreaves and Webb were asking her questions directly. "What do you think Barnaby was doing, and what do you think the meeting produced by noon?" What the meeting produced by noon was the acknowledgement that the February position required urgent management, and the agreement that Fitch would prepare a revised overview of the combined obligations, incorporating the points Isadora had raised, for a follow-up meeting the following Tuesday. Hargreaves said, as the meeting was concluding, that he would be happy to continue the discussion at the Alderton banking house's offices at the Duke and Duchess's convenience, and that the Duchess's perspective on the estate's position would be welcome at that conversation. He said this to Barnaby. He was looking at Isadora. Barnaby said, "My wife will attend." There was nothing in his tone that suggested difficulty with this. There was something in his tone that Isadora recognized as the tone of a man who had made a rapid adjustment and was implementing the adjustment without editorial commentary, which was a quality she had not known to expect in him, and which she noted. After Hargreaves and Webb left, and after Aldred left with the Henderson file to begin the drainage inquiry, and after Fitch left with the instruction to prepare the revised overview, Barnaby and Isadora were alone in the study. The room had the quality of a room where something significant had happened, and which was settling back into its ordinary proportions around the fact of it. Barnaby was at the head of the table. She was to his right. He looked at her. She looked back with the direct, organized attention she brought to most things. 3 weeks, he said. Yes, she said. You found the Henderson drainage survey, he said. You reviewed the estate accounts. You combined the February instrument positions. You identified the Meridian negotiating room. Yes, she said. In 3 weeks, he said. The information was available, she said. I needed to understand the estate I had married into. He was quiet for a moment. You should have been at the meeting from the beginning, he said. Not told about it, invited. She received this. Yes, she said. I should have. I thought, he started.
I know what you thought, she said, without unkindness. You thought the figures would be complex, and that I was 20 years old, and that these meetings were not the kind of thing my attendance would improve. Yes, he said. And now? He looked at the table, at the papers that remained, the Fitch folder and his own notes, and the estate file she had brought with her. And now, he said, I think I have been managing this estate at the level of someone who attends the meetings and trusts that things will remain as they are, and that the February position suggests they will not remain as they are, and that I have been married for 3 weeks to someone who understands this more clearly than I do. She looked at him. He was not performing this. He was the kind of man who said what he understood when he understood it, which was a quality she had not known to look for, and which she was finding, now that she had found it, more significant than she had expected. My father would like to meet with us, she said. In London. He has been waiting to see what the first meeting produced before suggesting it. Barnaby looked at her. He knew what the first meeting would produce, he said. He knew what I would do at the first meeting, she said. He was less certain about how you would respond. And now he knows, Barnaby said. He will know when I write to him this afternoon, she said. What will you tell him? She thought about this. She thought about the 3 weeks and the bottom drawer of the estate files, and the November restatement figure, and the Henderson drainage survey, and the meeting just concluded, and the courtesy of the pause she had given Barnaby, and how he had used it. I'll tell him, she said, that you suggested the meeting should have included me from the beginning. Barnaby looked at her. That's all? He said. That will tell him what he needs to know, she said. He almost smiled. The almost was the beginning of a smile, not a social smile, not a managed one, but the beginning of the smile of a man who has been in a meeting with his wife and has found that the meeting was better for her presence. The Voss instrument, he said. Northern Capital Partners. The restructuring proposal. Yes, she said. Can you draft it? I can, she said. I'll need the original instrument's terms. Fitch has them. I'll ask Fitch to send them today, he said. Good, she said. I'll have a draft by Thursday. He looked at her. Thursday, he said. If Fitch sends the terms today, she said. He will, Barnaby said. He paused. You've been doing this since you were 12. Reading accounts, she said. Yes. My father started me with the Cavendish banking concern's quarterly reports, and then moved me through the investment portfolio analysis, and then the estate instruments. By 15, I was reviewing the distressed positions with him. By 18, I was attending the recovery negotiation meetings as an observer. Observer, he said. I was not a participant in those meetings, she said. I was learning to watch. There is a quality to the conversation in a recovery negotiation that is different from the conversation in an ordinary meeting. The power structure is different. The language is different. The silences are different. She paused. I have been thinking about the silences in today's meeting. What did they tell you? That Hargreaves was recalibrating, she said.
He arrived expecting to be in a room with a man whose financial management he had been accommodating for 6 years. He is leaving expecting to be in a room with a man and a woman who understand the position. She paused. That is useful. It changes his negotiating posture before the negotiation begins. Barnaby looked at her. You did that deliberately, he said. I named what I knew, she said. What Hargreaves did with that knowledge is his own doing. He sat with this. She let him sit with it. The study had the specific quality of a room that had been used for meetings for 20 years, and which had, in the past 2 hours, been used for a different kind of meeting, a meeting where the information had been more complete than usual, and where the completeness had produced a different conversation. I owe you an apology, Barnaby said. She looked at him. For Monday, he said, when I told you about the meeting. I told you because I thought you should know it was happening, not because I expected you to attend. I assumed that you would not want to attend, and I did not ask. No, she said, you didn't. I should have asked, he said. Yes, she agreed.
If I ask now, he said, whether you would like to be present at the estate's financial management going forward, not as a courtesy but as a participant, what would you say? She thought about what to say. She had been thinking about what the marriage required since the morning after the wedding, which was when she had walked through Ashmore Hall for the first time as its Duchess, and had understood, from the quality of the house's functioning, what the house required, and what the house was getting. The house was getting a man who attended the meetings. The house needed someone who attended to what the meetings were about. She had understood in that first morning that this was going to be the work. Not managing the household, she could do that with one hand. The work was going to be the estate. The February instruments, the Henderson drainage, the Voss restructuring, the Meridian negotiating room, the 37 things in the estate files that were each individually manageable, and which were, in combination, the difference between an estate that was declining and an estate that was not. She had been prepared to do this work regardless of whether Barnaby asked. The asking was better. I would say yes, she said, and I would say that my father's visit to London should include a full review of the estate's financial position as I now understand it, so that we are operating from the same information. We, Barnaby said. Yes, she said, if you want that. I want that, he said, in the tone of a man who means what he says. She stood. She picked up the estate file she had brought, the one she had extracted from the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet in the estate room last week, which she had been reviewing in the evenings in the small sitting room that adjoined the bedroom, and which she had annotated in the margins with the small, organised handwriting she used for working notes. She put the file on the table in front of Barnaby. The annotations are mine, she said. The sections marked in blue are the items that need attention before February. The sections marked in red are the items that need attention this week. He looked at the file. He opened it. He read the first page of her annotations. He read the second. He looked up. This week, he said, includes the Henderson drainage. Yes, she said. The county board's contact for the agricultural drainage programme is a man named Morrison in the county office. I have his address. If we write to him by Friday, we can have a preliminary conversation about the drainage assessment before the Henderson renegotiation. You have Morrison's address? Barnaby said. It was in the county board file, she said. The same folder as the drainage survey. He looked at the annotated file. He looked at her. He said, Will you write the letter to Morrison? Yes, she said. And the Voss draft on Thursday. Yes, she said. And the letter to your father about the London meeting. This afternoon, she said. He closed the file. He held it for a moment, not reading, just holding the file that contained 3 weeks of her attention to an estate she had married into, and which she had, in those 3 weeks, understood more thoroughly than the people who had been managing it for years. Isadora, he said. She waited. On Monday, he said, when I told you about the meeting and suggested the figures would be complex, I said that because I assumed your age meant you would not understand them. Yes, she said. I know.
"I was wrong about the age," he said, "and about the assumption that the age was relevant." She looked at him. "Yes," she said, "you were." "I won't make that assumption again," he said. It was a simple sentence, and he said it with the flatness of a man making a commitment rather than a social gesture, which was the version of it that meant something. "Good," she said. She went to the door. She turned back. "The estate files," she said. "The bottom drawer of the cabinet in the estate room has the full instrument documentation, the original terms, not the summaries Fitch presents at meetings. I would recommend reading them." "All of them?" he said. "Start with the Alderton instrument," she said. "Read the original terms from the 3rd year of your father's tenure. Then read the first refinancing document. Then the second. By the time you've read those 3, you'll understand why the current position is what it is." He looked at her.
"How long will that take?" he said. 2 hours, she said, "if you read carefully." She left the study. She went to the small sitting room off the bedroom, and she sat at the writing desk that she had appropriated in the first week because it had the right light for correspondence and the right surface for spreading documents. She wrote to her father. The letter was 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph described the meeting in the organized, specific language she used in professional correspondence with him, what had been covered, who had been present, what the Meridian and Voss positions were. The second paragraph said, "He suggested the meeting should have included me from the beginning." The third paragraph said, "He asked me to write the Voss restructuring draft and the Morrison letter, and said he wants to be operating from the same information. He is currently in the estate room reading the original Alderton instrument." She sealed the letter. She put it in the outgoing post. She went back to her desk. She began the Morrison letter. The Morrison letter required care, because the framing of the request mattered. County board contacts were best approached through the channel of shared concern for agricultural productivity, rather than the channel of estate debt management, even though both were accurate descriptions of the situation. She wrote a draft. She revised it. She wrote it again. It was right on the third draft, which was the pattern she had developed for letters that required the right balance between directness and collaboration. She sealed it. She put it beside the letter to her father. She went to the estate room. The estate room was where the estate files lived, the long room at the back of the north wing that smelled of paper and the specific dry warmth of a room that had been managing records for 100 years. The bottom drawer of the filing cabinet was the drawer she had been working from for the past 10 days. She checked the file she had pulled earlier that week on the Henderson tenancy. She made 2 notes. She returned the file. She went back to the study. Barnaby was there. He had the Alderton instrument open on the table before him, the original from the 3rd year of his father's tenure, which was a 43-page document in the dense, formal language of banking instruments from that era. He was on page 12. He looked up when she came in. "The 1871 refinancing clause," he said. "This clause, this adds the legal costs of the refinancing to the principal." "Yes," she said. "No one told me that," he said. "Fitch may not have flagged it specifically," she said. "It was standard in instruments of that period. The effect is that each refinancing increases the principal by the cost of the legal documentation. Over 2 refinancings, the principal has increased by approximately £6,000 above what the initial borrowing was." He looked at the clause. He looked at the document. £6,000, he said. "Approximately," she said. "The exact figure is in the refinancing documentation, the second refinancing file, which is in the 3rd drawer." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to read the rest of this," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I told you to start there." She went back to her desk. She worked through the afternoon. She drafted the Voss restructuring proposal outline, not the final draft, which he had told Barnaby would be Thursday, but the structural framework that would become the draft when she had the original instrument's terms from Fitch. The framework covered the proposed term extension, the modest rate reduction she would request in exchange, the security provisions that would need to be adjusted, and the rationale for why the restructuring served Voss's interests.
She also pulled the county board's file on the drainage improvement programme and reviewed the cases her father's concern had been involved with. 2 of the 3 were county examples. She made notes on the structural approach that had worked in the Derbyshire case, which was the most similar to the Henderson situation. At 4 o'clock, Mrs. Aldred knocked. Tea. Isadora took it at the desk. She was writing the Henderson tenancy analysis, a 2-page note that laid out the drainage case and the proposed restructuring of the tenancy terms, when Barnaby came in. He had the Alderton instrument in his hand. He had read it. She could tell from the quality of his expression, which was the expression of a man who has read 43 pages of a document he should have read 11 years ago. He sat in the chair across from the desk. She waited. 43 pages, he said. Yes, she said. My father signed this in 1871, he said. I inherited it in 1879. In 8 years I have not read it. No, she said. Fitch has read it, he said. Yes, she said. But Fitch's presentation of the instrument has been at the summary level, he said. Fitch presents to the level of detail that he believes the principal requires, she said. If the principal has not indicated that more detail is wanted, the summary is what is offered. Barnaby was quiet. I have not indicated that more detail was wanted, he said. No, she said. He looked at the instrument in his hands. If I had read this in 1879, he said, would the current position be different? She thought about this. Possibly, she said. The second refinancing was in 1881. If you had understood the 1871 clause before 1881, you might have structured the 1881 refinancing differently, or engaged a different solicitor to advise on it. A different solicitor, he said. Fitch is loyal and competent, she said. He manages what is asked of him. A solicitor who is engaged to optimize rather than maintain would have flagged the 1871 clause before the 1881 refinancing and advised a different structure. You're saying Fitch has been managing the estate's legal affairs at the level he was asked to manage them, he said. Yes, she said. And the level he was asked to manage them was maintenance rather than optimization. He looked at her. Who should I be asking to optimize? He said. She had been waiting for this question. She had thought about it during the 3rd week when she was thinking about what the meeting would produce and what would happen afterward. My father has a solicitor, she said. His name is Webb. He is 61 and he has been managing the Cavendish banking concern's legal affairs for 30 years. He is the kind of solicitor who reads 43-page instruments and identifies the clauses that affect the refinancing structure before the refinancing occurs. Your father's solicitor, he said. My father would make an introduction, she said, at the London meeting. You had already thought of this, he said. Yes, she said. Before today, he said. In the 2nd week, she said, when I reviewed the estate accounts and understood the quality of the legal management. He looked at the instrument. He set it on the desk beside the Henderson analysis she had been writing. He looked at the analysis. He did not ask whether he could read it, he simply read it, which was the act of a man who had decided to treat the desk as a shared working space, which it was now, whether or not that had been established explicitly. She continued writing the 2nd page while he read the 1st. It was a quiet, working quiet, the quiet of a room where 2 people are attending to the same problem from different angles and are close enough to the same page that the working is possible. When he finished reading the 1st page, she handed him the 2nd. He read it. The county board programme, he said. Your father's concern has funded drainage improvements on 3 estates. The Derbyshire case is the most similar to Henderson, she said. The structural approach should translate. Morrison will know the county board's requirements. You're sending the Morrison letter, he said. This afternoon, she said. I've drafted it. Would you like to read it before it goes? He looked at her. Yes, he said. She handed him the Morrison letter. He read it. He read it carefully, which she noted, carefully in the sense of the reading of someone who is understanding rather than approving, which was a different quality and which mattered. He said, the 2nd paragraph. The shared concern for agricultural productivity. This is the framing you chose. Yes, she said. County board contacts respond better to the shared concern framing than to the estate management framing. How do you know that? He said. My father's concern has worked with county boards in 4 counties, she said. The language that produces cooperation is the language of shared public interest, rather than private estate management. The two things are connected, but the entry point matters. He looked at the letter. He handed it back. Send it, he said. She put it with the outgoing post. He sat back in the chair. Outside, the November afternoon was doing what November afternoons did, going dark earlier than seemed reasonable, the north garden visible through the study window in the specific bare quality of a garden between seasons, the structure of it visible without the covering of growth. The London meeting, he said. Your father. He will want to review everything, she said. The full instrument position, the February renewals, the Henderson situation, the Voss restructuring. And Webb, he said. He'll bring Webb, she said, if you want the introduction. I want it, he said. She made a note in the margin of the Henderson analysis. I'm adding it to the London meeting agenda, she said. He looked at her. He said, You're keeping an agenda for the London meeting. Since last week, she said, when I wrote to my father about the visit. He almost laughed. It was not quite a laugh, and it was not quite the beginning of one. It was the expression of a man who has encountered something that is both accurate and slightly absurd, and who is finding the combination affecting in a way he had not predicted. An agenda since last week, he said, before the estate meeting. I find it useful to prepare, she said. Yes, he said. I'm beginning to understand that. He stood. He picked up the Alderton instrument. The second refinancing file, he said. Third drawer. Third drawer from the top, she said. The file is labelled Alderton, 1881, refinancing. He went to find it. She went back to work. The study had the quality it had had since noon, the quality of a room where something had shifted, and where the shift was being built on rather than managed around. She wrote the Voss framework note. She reviewed the Henderson analysis. She added 3 items to the London meeting agenda. At 6 o'clock, Barnaby came back with the 1881 refinancing file. He sat down. He read it. She was still working.
They worked in the same room, in the working quiet, until the dinner hour. Before we continue, subscribe now and tell me in the comments, Barnaby read the original instrument, asked for Webb's introduction, let Isadora send the Morrison letter, and came back to read the 1881 refinancing file. They worked in the same room until dinner. What do you think that evening was like, and what do you think the London meeting with Charles Cavendish produced? The London meeting was 3 weeks later. Isadora had organised it with the organised attention she brought to most things, the date confirmed with her father, the agenda distributed in advance, the relevant instrument files copied and organised for the meeting's review. Her father arrived at Ashmore Hall's London townhouse at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. He was 63 and looked like what he was, which was a man who had spent 40 years understanding how money worked, and who had spent the most recent 3 weeks receiving letters from his daughter about what was in the estate files and what the first estate meeting had produced, and what the revised Voss proposal contained, and what the Morrison correspondence had so far generated. He had read all of it. He had written back to each letter with the 3 questions he always asked, which were, what does this tell you? What does it require? And what are you doing about it? She had answered all 3 questions in each subsequent letter. He met Barnaby for the second time, the first having been the meeting before the wedding, which had been a different kind of meeting, and he shook his hand and said, Your wife tells me you read the Alderton instrument. All 43 pages, Barnaby said. And the 1881 refinancing, Charles said. And the 1871 clause, Barnaby said. Good, Charles said. Then we can have a useful conversation. They had a useful conversation. It lasted 4 hours. It covered the February position and the Meridian negotiation, which was proceeding, as Isadora had predicted, toward a rate reduction of 17% from the preliminary figure, because Webb had begun the negotiation from a position informed by Meridian's portfolio composition and the Ashmore Instruments performance record. It covered the Voss restructuring, which Voss had, after receiving the proposal Isadora had drafted, agreed in principle to, pending formal documentation. It covered the Henderson tenancy. Morrison had responded to the Morrison letter, and a preliminary drainage assessment was scheduled for the following month. It also covered, in the meeting's final hour, the question of the estate's longer-term financial management and what a properly structured approach would require. Charles Cavendish said, "The estate has the income base to support its debt service if the debt structure is correctly organised. It has not been correctly organised, but that is recoverable." He said this to Barnaby. He glanced at Isadora. "I know," Barnaby said. "The recovery takes 3 to 4 years," Charles said. "The first year is the restructuring. The second year is the yield improvement, Henderson and the other north boundary tenancies once the drainage is addressed. The third year is the income stabilisation. By the fourth year, the estate should be servicing its debt from a position of adequate rather than marginal income." 3 to 4 years, Barnaby said. "If the management is consistent," Charles said, "and if someone is reading the instruments." Barnaby looked at Isadora. "Someone will be reading the instruments," he said. Charles looked at his daughter. She met his eyes. He had the expression he had when he was receiving information that confirmed something he had organised his life around believing, which was that knowledge belonged to whoever wanted it, and that the wanting was the only qualification that mattered. He said to Barnaby, "I would like to introduce you to Webb." Webb came in from the adjacent sitting room, where he had been waiting with the professional patience of a solicitor who had been waiting for a specific meeting for 20 years. He was 61 and had the quality of a man who read 43-page instruments as a matter of professional habit, and who had, 3 weeks earlier, reviewed the Ashmore estate's full instrument file and had produced a 12-page assessment that was currently on the table at the centre of the meeting. The introduction was made. The 12-page assessment was reviewed. 3 of the 12 pages covered the 1871 clause and its effect on the 2 refinancings and the corrective approach for any future refinancing. Barnaby read all 12 pages. He asked Webb 7 questions. Webb answered all 7. At the meeting's end, Barnaby looked at Charles Cavendish and said, "I would like to engage Webb as the estate's primary solicitor for the debt management, with Fitch continuing in the role of estate administration." Charles said, "That is a reasonable structure." Webb said he was available. Isadora made a note on the meeting agenda. Her father looked at her note. He said quietly to Barnaby, "She has been making notes on an agenda she started before the first estate meeting." "I know," Barnaby said. "I have been finding the notes useful." Charles looked at his daughter. He said nothing. He did not need to. She knew what the look contained, because she had been reading her father's expressions since she was 12, and she understood this one. The specific, private satisfaction of a man who has spent 40 years believing that knowledge belongs to whoever wants it, and who is watching the belief produce the thing it was supposed to produce. She looked back at him with the same organised attention she brought to most things. He nodded. She nodded. They went to lunch, which Mrs. Aldred had organised at the townhouse with the reliable competence of a woman who had been managing the Ashmore household for 20 years, and who had, in the past 3 weeks, developed the specific appreciation for the new Duchess that reliable, competent people develop for other reliable, competent people. The quiet recognition of someone who manages things correctly. At lunch, her father asked Barnaby about the Voss restructuring. Barnaby explained it accurately: the term extension, the rate reduction, the security provision adjustment, the rationale for why it served Voss's interests. He explained it in the language of the proposal Isadora had drafted, which was the correct language because the proposal had been drafted correctly. Her father listened. He asked 2 questions. Barnaby answered both. Charles Cavendish looked at his daughter. She was eating her soup. He said nothing.
She looked up. He said, "The Morrison correspondence. How has it progressed?" "Morrison has confirmed the drainage assessment for the 3rd of December, she said. "The Henderson family has been informed. Aldred is coordinating the site access." "The assessment firm," Charles said. "The county board uses Harcastle Agricultural Engineering," she said. "They have done the drainage work on 2 similar estates in the county. I reviewed their reports from the Fenwick estate case in 2019. The situation was comparable. The methodology should transfer." "Good," her father said. He returned to his lunch. Barnaby looked at Isadora. She returned to her soup. At the meal's end, when Charles Cavendish was preparing to leave, he said to Barnaby, "My daughter has been reading estate instruments since she was 15. "I know that now," Barnaby said. "She reviewed your estate's debt position before the wedding," Charles said. "She told me," Barnaby said. "And you were not concerned," Charles said. Barnaby thought about this. "I was surprised," he said. "I was not concerned. The information was accurate and the estate needed someone to attend to it." He paused. "I should have been less surprised and more prepared to attend to it myself, but the position now is that we are both attending to it, which is an improvement on the previous arrangement." Charles looked at him. He looked at his daughter. He said, "I told her the figures would be complex." "You told her they would tell the story of what was happening," Barnaby said, "and she learned to read the story. I have been attending the meetings for 8 years without reading it." "Yes," Charles said, "that is an accurate summary." He said it without editorial. He put on his coat. He said to Isadora, "Write to me after the Morrison assessment." "Yes," she said. He left. The townhouse was quiet in the specific way of a house from which a significant presence has just departed. Barnaby and Isadora were in the sitting room. He looked at her. "He is proud of you," he said. "Yes," she said. "He organized your education deliberately," he said. "The quarterly reports at 12, the investment portfolio at 15, the recovery meetings at 18. He believed knowledge belonged to whoever wanted it," she said. "I wanted it." "And he gave it to you," Barnaby said. "He gave me access to it," she said. "I did the rest." He looked at her. He said, "I am going to need your help. With the estate. With the February position. With the Webb engagement and the Voss restructuring and the Henderson drainage and everything else in the file you annotated." "I know," she said. "I am asking," he said, "rather than assuming." She looked at him. She thought about Monday, when he had told her about the meeting in the tone of someone who had not expected to be asking and who had not asked. She thought about the study and the silence and the 43 pages and the 7 questions for Webb and the lunch and the soup. She thought about the letter to her father 3 weeks ago, the 2nd paragraph, which had said he suggested the meeting should have included me from the beginning. "Yes," she said. "I'll help." "Thank you," he said. They went to find the estate files that Webb had returned at the meeting's end, which were now in the townhouse study, organized by the filing system she had established in the 2nd week of the marriage, and which Barnaby had, that afternoon, asked to understand. She showed him the system. He understood it by the end of the first hour. They worked until 6. The study had the quality it had had since the first estate meeting, the quality of a room where 2 people were attending to the same problem, and where the attending was, in its organized, patient way, producing something that was better than either of them would have produced alone. It was not a comfortable quality. It was a working one. Working qualities, in her father's estimation, were the better kind. She agreed with him. She always had.